I was elbow-deep in soil when my phone rang with the university budget cuts. Ironic timing, my hands nurturing life while my career was being strangled. Standing in Arlington's botanical garden surrounded by rare saplings I'd spent 3 years cultivating, I listened to my funding disappear while autumn leaves spiraled down around me. "We're prioritizing departments with immediate economic impact, Dr. Rodriguez." The dean's voice crackled through my speaker. His words felt like small stones hitting my back. "Denise trees could revolutionize urban heat management," I argued, dirt crumbling between my trembling fingers. 3 more seasons of data and... I'm sorry, Lillian. The decision is final. After hanging up, I pressed my forehead against rough oak bark, breathing in its earthy scent. The garden was silent except for distant traffic and my ragged breathing. 35 years old and watching my research wither before it bloomed. Saturday markets usually lifted my spirits, but today the farmer's market felt too bright, too cheerful. I wandered aimlessly, the morning mist burning off around colorful produce stands. That's when I spotted them. Black morel mushrooms, impossibly rare for this season. "How would you prepare these?" I asked the vendor, reaching for the small basket. "I'd sauté them with white wine and thyme," answered a voice beside me. "Not the vendors." Our hands collided over the mushrooms. I turned to find striking gray eyes studying me from beneath wisps of blonde hair. She was older than me, maybe early 40s, with an elegance that seemed effortless in simple jeans and a cashmere sweater. "Sorry," we both said at once, then laughed. "And I'd use butter instead of oil," she continued, a slight smile playing on her lips. "And let their earthiness be the star." "And I was thinking more along the lines of risotto," I countered. "And amateur move." Her eyes sparkled with challenge. Teas deserve simplicity. Something about her confidence both irritated and intrigued me. The vendor watched our exchange with amusement. "Ladies, I have enough for both of you," he offered. She gestured for me to take them. "I insist. Though you're wasting their potential." I should have walked away with my mushrooms. Instead, I asked, "And you're an expert because..." "Georgia Hughes." She extended her hand. "I've been foraging since before you could reach a stovetop." The autumn breeze carried the scent of apples and wood smoke between us. Her handshake was firm, her fingers cool against my gardener's calluses. "Lillian Rodriguez. I'm actually a botanist, so I know a thing or two about fungi." "And tree scientist?" Her eyebrow arched. "Perhaps you can help me with something." "I have an oak on my property. Been there 2 centuries. It's showing signs of trouble." 2 hours later, I found myself standing before a Georgian-style mansion on Arlington's historic north side, wondering what madness had possessed me to accept her invitation. The massive oak dominated the side yard, its canopy spanning wider than the house itself. Georgia appeared on the porch, silhouetted against leaded glass windows. "Come see what's killing my tree," she called. I didn't tell her I'd just lost funding for my research. I didn't mention that diagnosing her tree wouldn't pay my rent. I simply followed her across the lawn, drawn by scientific curiosity and something else I couldn't name. What I didn't know then, as I ran my fingers along that ancient bark, was that this tree wasn't dying at all. It was Georgia Hughes who was running out of time, and I was about to become tangled in roots far deeper than I could imagine. The Hughes estate made me painfully aware of my mud-stained jeans and field boots. Georgia moved through her ancestral home with the casual confidence of someone born to privilege, while I trailing behind her like a stray dog that had followed her home. "This place has been in my family for 5 generations, Georgia explained, leading me through rooms where antiques worth more than my annual salary sat gathering dust. Though sometimes it feels more like a beautiful prison than a home." I nodded, pretending to understand what it meant to inherit something other than student debt. The mansion smelled of beeswax polish and old books, a pleasant mustiness that spoke of history. "The tree is just through here," she said, pushing open French doors that led to a stone terrace. "So my great-grandfather planted it as a sapling in 1823. The massive oak stood like a sentinel, its gnarled branches reaching toward the gray October sky. As I approached it, my professional instincts took over. This was familiar territory. Trees I understood, wealthy women in cashmere sweaters, not so much. "Mind if I climb up a bit?" I asked, already slipping off my light jacket. Georgia looked surprised but nodded. "One be my guest." I hoisted myself onto the lower branches with practiced ease, my hands finding comfortable holds in the textured bark. The higher I climbed, the more the world simplified. Up here, it was just me and the tree. "What do you see?" Georgia called from below. "And signs of fungal infection in the upper branches," I answered, straddling a thick limb to examine leaf patterns. "But nothing fatal if we treat it soon." When I descended, Georgia was waiting at the base, her face upturned. She was closer than I expected, and I nearly lost my footing on the final jump down. Her hand shot out to steady me, gripping my forearm. "Oh, watch yourself," she murmured. Our faces were inches apart, and I could smell her perfume minus something expensive and subtle, like woodland flowers after rain. We both stepped back too quickly. Georgia pointed to a dark patch on the trunk, her finger grazing mine as we both touched the rough surface. "What about this?" "Unjust natural aging," I said, my voice catching slightly. "And trees get character lines too." Her gray eyes met mine, and something electric passed between us. Then she glanced away, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "I must be thirsty after playing monkey. Come inside, I've opened some wine." The kitchen was surprisingly modest compared to the rest of the house. Georgia poured 2 glasses of white wine that sparkled like liquid gold in the afternoon light. I took a sip, the crisp acidity dancing on my tongue. "So what's your diagnosis, Dr. Rodriguez?" she asked, leaning against the marble countertop. "Fir oak has armillaria root rot. Treatable, but it'll need regular attention over the next few months." Georgia swirled her wine thoughtfully. "And would you be providing this attention?" "I could," I heard myself saying, though I should have been focusing on finding a new research grant, not playing tree doctor to some rich woman. "And for a consultation fee, of course." She smiled. "Of course." 2 glasses of wine later, Georgia led me to her study minus a room lined with leather-bound books and family photographs. She pulled out an old album showing me sepia images of her ancestors standing beside the oak at various stages of its growth. "My family's complicated," she admitted, her finger tracing the stern face of an elderly man. "My grandfather built this fortune on timber harvesting, which is ironic considering how much I love that old oak." "Why do you stay here alone?" I asked, the wine making me bold. Something shadowed her expression. "Who says I'm alone?" I felt my cheeks flush. I just assumed. "The undeniably Hughes family reunion is coming up," she said, closing the album. 20 relatives descending to discuss selling this place out from under me. Let's just say preserving the estate isn't everyone's priority. As I left that evening, Georgia handed me a business card with her personal number scrawled on the back. "Sir, for tree emergencies," she said with a half smile. Driving home, I kept seeing her gray eyes, feeling the phantom touch of her hand on my arm. I told myself I was just excited about treating the magnificent oak, but somewhere deeper, I knew a different kind of root system was already forming, connecting us in ways I wasn't ready to acknowledge. Over the next 3 weeks, I found increasingly flimsy excuses to return to the Hughes estate. What began as weekly treatments for the oak became twice-weekly visits, then every other day. I'd tell myself it was professional thoroughness, but the flutter in my stomach when Georgia's number lit up my phone suggested otherwise. "And the mycorrhizal fungi network is responding well to the treatment," I explained during my 5th visit, kneeling at the base of the great oak while Georgia crouched beside me. She wore gardening gloves that probably cost more than my car payment, yet there was genuine dirt under her manicured nails. "And you make tree science sound almost poetic," she said, her shoulder brushing mine as she leaned in to see where I was pointing. "And trees communicate through these underground networks minus they share resources, warn each other of dangers. They're more connected than we realize." I was babbling, too aware of her proximity. Georgia smiled. "Like people pretending to be islands when they're really part of an archipelago?" I looked at her in surprise. "Exactly like that." Later, she invited me to stay for dinner. We ate on the terrace despite the autumn chill, watching darkness claim the garden. Georgia spoke about her travels, her brief marriage that ended amicably, her passion for historic preservation. I shared stories about forest research in Costa Rica, my struggle for tenure, my parents' expectations that I'd become a real doctor. "So are a real doctor," Georgia insisted, refilling my wine glass. How you heal living things. The week after, I arrived to find Georgia elbow-deep in soil herself, attempting to follow my instructions for root care. Her blonde hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, smudges of dirt on her cheeks making her look younger, more vulnerable. "And you're doing it wrong," I laughed, dropping my bag to show her the proper technique. "I'm a quick study," she protested, but let me guide her hands through the motions. On my 8th visit, the October sky darkened suddenly, heavy clouds rolling in without warning. I was examining upper branches when the first fat raindrops began to fall. "Hurry!" Georgia called from below, already running toward a glass structure at the garden's edge. I scrambled down the oak as rain began pounding in earnest, pelting my back and soaking through my shirt in seconds. By the time I reached the greenhouse, I was drenched and laughing, water streaming down my face. Georgia pulled me inside, equally soaked. The greenhouse was warm and humid, filled with tropical plants I immediately recognized as rare specimens. Rain drummed against the glass panels, creating a cocoon of white noise around us. "And you're shivering," Georgia said, noticing my trembling. "And I'm fine," I insisted, though my teeth were nearly chattering. Georgia disappeared briefly, returning with a soft blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. "In my mother's greenhouse," she explained as I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders. The only place she felt truly happy, according to my father. Thunder cracked overhead, making us both jump. Georgia laughed nervously, then gestured to a bench surrounded by blooming orchids. "When we might as well get comfortable. These summer storms usually pass quickly." We sat shoulder to shoulder, watching rain streak down the glass walls. The greenhouse felt impossibly intimate minus steam rising from our damp clothes, the heady scent of flowers, the containment of being sheltered together while chaos reigned outside. "Why did you really invite me here that first day?" I asked, the question that had been nagging me for weeks. Georgia was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Loneliness, I suppose. And you looked at that mushroom with such intensity minus like it mattered. I wanted someone to look at my problems that way." Her honesty disarmed me. Without thinking, I reached for her hand. Her fingers entwined with mine naturally, like vines seeking support. "Lillian," she whispered, turning toward me. What happened next felt as inevitable as gravity. Georgia's lips found mine, tentative at first, then with surprising urgency. She tasted like rain and wine and possibility. My hand moved to her face, tracing the elegant line of her jaw as her arms pulled me closer. Then she abruptly pulled away, her eyes wide with something like fear. "I'm sorry," she said, standing quickly. I shouldn't have done that. It's inappropriate." "Georgia." "The rain's letting up," she interrupted, moving toward the door. "Well, we should head back before it starts again." The walk to the house was silent, the air between us charged with unspoken words. At my car, Georgia apologized again, more formally this time. "Forget it happened," she said, not meeting my eyes. But driving home through the rain-washed streets, I knew forgetting was impossible. Like the oak's roots spreading unseen beneath the soil, something had fundamentally changed between us, creating connections neither of us had anticipated. The difference between Quercus alba and Quercus rubra is primarily in the... And my voice droned on as 30 undergraduates stared back with glazed expressions. I'd lost them 20 minutes ago, but more concerning was that I'd lost myself somewhere in Georgia Hughes's greenhouse 3 days ago. "The Dr. Rodriguez?" A student in the front row raised her hand. "And the slide's been blank for like 2 minutes." I blinked, suddenly aware I'd been standing silently, clicker in hand, staring into middle distance. "It's all right, sorry." I fumbled to advance to the next slide. As I was saying, the leaf morphology... But I wasn't seeing leaves. I was seeing Georgia's gray eyes, feeling her lips against mine, the scent of rain and orchids surrounding us. I'd canceled my next scheduled visit to the estate, citing a non-existent conference. The truth was, I needed space to sort through the riot of emotions that single kiss had unleashed. After class, my department chair cornered me in the hallway. "Lillian, about your grant proposal." "I'm still revising it," I cut in quickly. "And deadline's Friday." His eyebrows knitted together. "Are you all right? You seem distracted lately." "Just tired," I lied. "I'll have it done." In my office, I stared at the blank document on my computer screen. The cursor blinked accusingly. Instead of typing, I found myself Googling a Georgia Hughes Arlington for the 10th time that week. The results were always the same. Society page mentions, Historic Preservation Board appointments, a feature in Architectural Digest about the Hughes estate. My phone rang, startling me so badly I knocked over my coffee. Georgia's name flashed on the screen. My heart performed gymnastics as I debated letting it go to voicemail. "Hello?" I finally answered, hating how breathless I sounded. The background noise suggested she was in a car. "Cite, Lillian. Thank God. I need your help." Her voice had an edge I hadn't heard before, minus something between panic and determination. "What's wrong?" "Is it the tree?" A bitter laugh. "Son, I wish. It's my damn family. My cousin Richard just called. He's mobilizing votes to sell the estate unless I can convince them I have long-term plans for the property." I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "What does that have to do with me?" A long pause. Remember I mentioned the family reunion? This weekend, right?" "Yes. And I might have told them something when they were pressuring me last month." Her voice dropped lower. "And I might have told them I was seeing someone serious, someone who shared my vision for the estate's future." The implications took a moment to register. "Invented a partner?" "Not entirely invented, just premature." She sighed. Now Richard is insisting I bring this mystery partner to the reunion, or he'll take it as proof I was lying and push harder for the sale." I gripped the edge of my desk. "Georgia, what exactly are you asking me?" "Come to the reunion, pretend we're together, just for the weekend." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I'll pay you, of course. Consider it a consulting fee." "So you want to hire me to be your girlfriend?" The absurdity of the situation would have been funny if my pulse wasn't racing at the mere suggestion. "My partner," she corrected. "It doesn't have to be romantic in presentation, just someone who supports my vision for preserving the estate." I should have said no immediately. My grant was due in 3 days. I was already emotionally confused about our relationship. Pretending to be her partner would only complicate things further. "When would you need me there?" I heard myself asking instead. "Friday evening through Sunday afternoon." I closed my eyes, picturing Georgia's face when she'd apologized after our kiss, minus the conflict, the vulnerability beneath her usual composure. "And no payment," I finally said. "I'll do it as a friend." Her exhale was audible. "Thank you. I'll make this up to you somehow." "Just be clear about what you expect," I said, my academic mind already cataloging the potential disasters. "What's our backstory? How long have we been together? Does your family know you date women?" "I'll pick you up Friday at 5, Georgia replied, skillfully avoiding all my questions. "And pack for 2 nights. And Lillian?" "Yes?" "Bring something formal for Saturday night's dinner. It's tradition." After hanging up, I sat in my silent office, the grant proposal still blank on my screen. What had I just agreed to? Pretending to be the partner of a woman I'd shared exactly 1 kiss with. A woman who clearly regretted that kiss, to help her keep her family mansion. I touched my lips unconsciously, remembering the greenhouse, the rain, the moment everything changed. Whatever was happening between Georgia and me was complicated enough without adding deception to the mix. Yet Friday at 5, I found myself waiting on the curb outside my apartment building, weekend bag at my feet, watching for Georgia's silver Mercedes. Georgia's Mercedes pulled up precisely at 5. She looked different, minus polished, in a way I hadn't seen before, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo, pearl earrings catching the late afternoon light. "And you look nice," I said, suddenly self-conscious about my simple dress and boots. "And I look like I'm heading to my own execution," she replied with a tight smile, popping the trunk from my bag. "And the Hughes family reunion requires armor, not clothing." We spent the hour-long drive reviewing our fabricated relationship timeline. According to Georgia's hastily constructed fiction, we'd been dating quietly for 8 months, having met through my work with the university's arboretum. "Why didn't you tell them about me sooner?" I asked as we turned onto the long driveway leading to the estate. Georgia's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Because they'd never believe I'd fall for someone without social connections or family money." The honest assessment stung more than it should have. "Charming family you've got. Ain't I warned you?" She parked beside 3 other luxury vehicles. The vultures have already arrived. The house looked different now, minus lights blazing from every window, suitcases in the foyer, voices echoing through previously silent rooms. Georgia kept her hand at the small of my back as she led me through introductions, the gentle pressure both reassuring and distracting. "Sis is Lillian Rodriguez," she announced to the assembled relatives in the drawing room. "My partner." I smiled through the scrutiny, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. Georgia's Aunt Margaret examined me through narrowed eyes. Her cousin Richard, minus the ringleader of the sell the estate faction, minus barely concealed his skepticism. "Want a tree doctor?" he asked, his handshake deliberately crushing. Georgia mentioned she was consulting an arborist. Didn't realize the consultation was so personal. "Life is full of surprises," I replied, matching his grip. Dinner was an excruciating affair of pointed questions and barely veiled insinuations. I fielded inquiries about my background, education, and family with as much grace as I could muster. When asked about my intentions regarding Georgia, I nearly choked on my wine. "I'm hardly after her money, if that's what you're implying," I said to Richard's wife, whose name I'd already forgotten. "And have my own career." "Of course," she simpered. "Studying trees must be so rewarding." Georgia's foot found mine under the table, a gentle pressure that somehow translated to, "I'm sorry, they're awful." Later, Georgia showed me to my room minus, or rather, our room. The implications hit me as she closed the door behind us. "And should have mentioned the sleeping arrangements," she said, noting my widened eyes. Inchard insisted on putting his family in the West Wing guest rooms, which means, we're sharing. I stared at the king-sized 4-poster bed draped in antique linens. "I can sleep on the chaise," Georgia offered quickly, pointing to a narrow lounge by the window. "Don't be ridiculous." I set my bag down with more confidence than I felt. "We're both adults, and apparently we've been dating for 8 months. Georgia nodded, a flush creeping up her neck. "Oh right, of course." We navigated an awkward dance of taking turns in the bathroom, changing into pajamas with averted eyes. When we finally settled under the covers, I was acutely aware of every inch of space between us. "One cousin doesn't believe we're together," I whispered into the darkness. "And Richard wouldn't believe water is wet if I told him so." Georgia's voice came soft from her side of the bed. "He's been trying to sell this place since my parents died. He thinks I'm wasting my inheritance maintaining a museum." "Is that what this place is to you, a museum?" The sheets rustled as she turned toward me. "No, it's home. The only real one I've ever had." The vulnerability in her voice made me roll to face her. In the dim moonlight filtering through the curtains, I could just make out her profile. "We need a better story," I said. "Oh, and about how we met. The farmer's market mushrooms is actually pretty good." "And our first kiss?" Georgia asked, so quietly I almost missed it. My mouth went dry remembering the greenhouse. He could say it was during a rainstorm. "That's almost true." Her hand found mine atop the covers. "Thank you for doing this, Lillian. And let's practice," I suggested impulsively. "Our story, I mean." "So we sound convincing?" Georgia propped herself up on one elbow. "All right. When did you know you were falling for me?" The question caught me off guard. When you showed me that album of your family standing beside the oak through generations. The way you traced your grandfather's face?" "That's good," she whispered. Specific but not too rehearsed. "Your turn," I prompted. "What do you love about me?" In the silence that followed, I felt the weight of our charade minus and the dangerous territory we were entering. This wasn't just pretend anymore. We were dancing around truths neither of us was ready to acknowledge. "Sore passion," Georgia finally answered. "The way you see life in things others dismiss as background." My heart hammered against my ribs as she shifted closer. "Should we practice more?" she asked, her breath warm against my cheek. "Practice what?" "Looking like we're in love." I woke to sunlight streaming through parted curtains and Georgia's arm draped across my waist. Sometime during our practice, we'd fallen asleep wrapped around each other, her head nestled against my shoulder. I allowed myself 10 seconds to memorize the feeling before carefully extracting myself. Sorry, Georgia mumbled, her eyes fluttering open. Did I cross a boundary? We're supposed to be girlfriends, remember? I smiled to hide my racing pulse. And besides, you barely snore. After breakfast with the early rising relatives, Georgia gave me a proper tour of the estate grounds, our hands linked for anyone watching from the windows. We ended at the old oak, where I checked on its progress while Georgia spread a blanket beneath its branches. And a treatment's working, I told her, joining her on the blanket. The fungal infection is receding, and like everything else in my life, requiring expensive intervention. She sighed, leaning against the trunk. I found something you might find interesting. In the library. From her jacket pocket she pulled yellowed papers sealed in a protective sleeve, property documents from 1902. I was looking for ammunition against Richard's claim that the estate is too expensive to maintain. I unfolded the brittle pages cautiously. They detailed property boundaries and timber rights for the Hughes estate, with mentions of a separate parcel designated as conservation land. I'm not sure I understand, I admitted. And timberland that everyone thinks is part of the estate? Georgia pointed to a boundary line. According to these documents, it was placed in a separate conservation trust by my great-grandfather. It can't legally be logged or sold. I studied the papers, recognition dawning. So the most valuable part of the property for development may not actually be mine to defend, Georgia finished. Which means Richard's plans to sell to developers would be legally contested. I looked up at her. Have you shown this to anyone else? She shook her head. I just found them yesterday morning before picking you up. I haven't even had time to consult my lawyer. A shadow fell across the blanket. Richard stood there, hands in his pockets, watching us with barely disguised suspicion. Cozy, he commented. Is this where you conduct your tree therapy, Dr. Rodriguez? Actually, I was just explaining to Georgia that this oak predates the Revolutionary War. I improvised. When a root system likely extends under the entire western acreage. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Fascinating. Though I'm more interested in the root of your relationship. Georgia's never mentioned you at family gatherings before. When we wanted privacy, Georgia replied smoothly. I know how judgmental this family can be. Indeed. His gaze lingered on the documents in my hand. What are those? Georgia reclaimed the papers casually. On just some old property maps I'm showing Lillian. She's interested in historical land use patterns. Richard didn't look convinced, but mercifully retreated toward the house. Once he was out of earshot, I exhaled. A knows something's up. Richard always thinks something's up. Georgia carefully refolded the documents. A real question is whether these papers will hold up legally if challenged. That evening, dinner devolved into a thinly veiled battlefield. Richard had rallied several cousins to his cause, arguing passionately for unlocking the estate's potential through strategic development. Maintenance alone costs a fortune, Richard's wife chimed in. Georgia, darling, you're pouring money down a drain. Assist's estate has been in our family for generations, Georgia countered. Some things are worth preserving. Preservation doesn't pay the property taxes, another cousin remarked. I watched Georgia tensing beside me, her composure fraying under the continued assault. Without thinking, I placed my hand over hers on the table. Actually, I interjected, historic properties like this qualify for significant tax incentives under conservation easements. Georgia and I have been discussing several options with the State Historical Society. Every eye at the table turned to me. I continued with growing confidence, drawing on knowledge from a preservation conference I'd attended last year. In the oak we've been treating is just the beginning. This property could become a model for sustainable historic conservation while generating income through limited public access programs. Richard's expression darkened. How convenient that Georgia found someone who supports her impractical attachment to this money pit. And some of us value things beyond their market price, I replied, meeting his gaze. The tension was broken by Margaret calling for dessert to be served. As conversations fractured around the table, Georgia squeezed my hand under the tablecloth. Thank you, she whispered. Back in our room after dinner, Georgia closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. You were magnificent, she said, kicking off her heels. Where did you learn all that about conservation easements? In conference last spring. I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. Did it help? And it bought us time. She crossed to stand before me, taking both my hands. Lillian, I don't know how to thank you. Oh, no need. I looked up at her. That's what fake girlfriends are for. Something shifted in her expression, minus vulnerability giving way to determination. She leaned down, her lips brushing my cheek. What if I don't want it to be fake anymore? She whispered. Her words hung in the air between us, reshaping everything. I stared up at Georgia, searching her face for any sign that this was just another part of our performance. Washan, what are you saying? My voice came out surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. Georgia sat beside me on the bed, her fingers still entwined with mine. In saying that somewhere between you lecturing me about fungal networks and defending me against my family, this stopped being pretend for me. I wanted to believe her, but doubt crept in like shadow. Is this because I helped with Richard? Because you don't need to... It's not gratitude, she interrupted, a flash of irritation crossing her features. And give me more credit than that. Then what changed? In the greenhouse you pulled away. You apologized like it was a mistake. Georgia released my hands, rising to pace the room. The elegant dress she'd worn to dinner caught the lamplight as she moved. And I've spent my entire life meeting expectations, she said finally. Own proper Hughes heiress. I dated men my parents approved of. I maintained this house exactly as tradition dictated. She paused, looking out the window toward the ancient oak, just visible in the moonlight. You came along with your soil samples and scientific certainty, challenging everything I thought I knew. About trees? And about myself. She turned back to me, and the greenhouse scared me, not because I didn't want it, but because I wanted it too much. I stood, crossing to where she stood. And now? Now I'm tired of pretending. She reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. Aren't you? The moment stretched between us, taut with possibility. Then a sharp knock shattered it. Georgia? Richard's voice came through the door. Ansus, we need to talk. Georgia closed her eyes briefly before calling back. It's nearly midnight, Richard. It's important. His tone left no room for refusal. With a frustrated sigh, Georgia opened the door. Richard stood in the hallway, a manila folder in his hand and triumph in his eyes. And so I was going through Father's old files, he said without preamble. Imagine my surprise when I found these. He withdrew several photographs from the folder. My stomach dropped as I recognized myself in the images minus arriving at George's house, examining the oak, leaving in my car, all clearly taken with a telephoto lens from beyond the property line. The dates stamped in the corner showed they spanned the past month. You've been having her boyfriend spy on me? Georgia's voice was ice. Just documenting your tree doctor's visits. And Richard's smug expression turned to me. Curious how your professional relationship began exactly 1 month ago, not 8 months as you claimed at dinner. I felt the blood drain from my face. So you're not even trying to hide your scheme, he continued. Bringing in an outsider to support your conservation fantasy? Creating a fake relationship to convince us you're settling down? He laughed coldly. And a family deserves to know they're being manipulated. Georgia stepped forward, her composed exterior cracking. I'll get out. Gladly. But I'm showing these to everyone at breakfast. He tucked the photos away. Your tree doctor game is over, Georgie. After he left, silence engulfed the room. Georgia pressed her fingertips to her temples. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never thought he'd go this far. It doesn't matter, I said, though the humiliation of being exposed as a fraud before her entire family burned in my chest. And he does matter. Georgia's voice hardened. Then this was my idea, my lie. You were just helping me. She sank onto the chaise lounge. And I'll tell them the truth tomorrow. Take full responsibility. And then what? They'll sell your home out from under you. Maybe they should. Defeat crept into her tone. Maybe it's time to let go of the past. I knelt before her, taking her hands. Georgia, this place isn't just your past. It's part of who you are. Those documents we found today could still protect the land, regardless of our situation. She looked at me with something like wonder. Why do you care so much about helping me? The question hit me like a physical blow. Why did I care? I barely knew this woman 3 weeks ago. Yet here I was, fighting for her home, her heritage, her happiness. And 'cause I'm falling in love with you, I admitted, the words escaping before I could catch them. Not pretend love. Real, terrifying, inconvenient love. Georgia's expression transformed, hope replacing despair. She leaned forward, her hands framing my face. Oh, tell Lillian, she whispered, her lips a breath away from mine. Then something shifted in her eyes, minus doubt replacing desire. She pulled back suddenly, rising to her feet. You should go, she said, not meeting my gaze. Pack your things, leave before breakfast. I'll handle Richard. Georgia, I meant what I said. Please. Her voice broke. I can't do this right now. Not with everything else falling apart. I stood, hurt and confusion warring within me. So you're pushing me away? Again? Aim protecting you from my mess, she insisted. This was never your fight. That's not your decision to make. But Georgia had already turned away, arms wrapped around herself like armor. And a night, Lillian. I retreated to the bathroom with my overnight bag, changing into jeans and a sweater with mechanical movements. When I emerged, Georgia was standing at the window, her back to the room. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket and walked out. 3 days passed in a blur of grant applications and mindless lectures. I threw myself into work with obsessive intensity, as if scientific rigor could somehow heal the hollow feeling in my chest. My phone remained silent, minus no calls or texts from Georgia. I told myself it was better this way. Whatever had sparked between us had been built on pretense and necessity, not solid ground. Late Wednesday afternoon, I returned to my small apartment to find a sleek silver Mercedes parked outside. My heart stumbled in my chest as I approached my front door, keys clutched so tightly they left imprints in my palm. But it wasn't Georgia waiting on my doorstep. Instead, I found a thick manila envelope with my name written in her elegant hand. Inside was the original deed I'd seen at the estate, minus the document proving the timberlands were held in conservation trust, minus along with a handwritten note. And you were right. These stood up to legal scrutiny. The land is protected forever. Thank you for seeing what matters. G. I stared at the note, reading between the sparse lines for something more personal, some hint of what had passed between us. Nothing but gratitude for professional services rendered. Thursday morning, I canceled my classes and drove to the university greenhouse instead. Among the experimental saplings and research specimens, I could breathe again. Plants made sense. They responded to sunlight and water with predictable chemistry. They didn't run hot and cold, didn't make you believe in possibilities only to shut you out. My phone chirped with a text from the department secretary, a woman looking for you. Blonde, expensive shoes. Sent her to greenhouse. I froze, dirt crumbling between my fingers. Through the greenhouse glass, I saw her approaching minus Georgia Hughes, looking both out of place and perfectly composed among the academic disarray. Her blonde hair was loose around her shoulders, simpler than I'd ever seen her dressed in jeans and a soft sweater. "The assistant said I'd find you here," she said when she reached me. I brushed soil from my hands. "I'm not hiding." "Aren't you?" Her gray eyes held mine. I went to your office first." "What do you want, Georgia?" The question came out sharper than intended. "And to apologize?" She glanced around the greenhouse, lips curving slightly. Appropriate setting, I suppose. The memory of our first kiss hung between us, as tangible as the humid air. "And got what you needed," I said, gesturing to where I'd left her envelope on a workbench. "When land is protected, congratulations." "That's not why I'm here." She took a step closer. Richard showed everyone the photos at breakfast, just like he threatened. And sorry. "Don't be." A smile ghosted across her face. "And I told them the truth. That I'd hired you professionally, that the relationship was my invention to stall their plans, that you'd agreed to help because you believe in conservation." I blinked in surprise. How did they take it? Better than expected. Aunt Margaret called me manipulative, but eventually admired my strategy. Her smile widened, and I showed them the trust documents and watched Richard turn several interesting shades of purple. Despite myself, I laughed, and Cy would have paid to see that. And I also told them something else. Georgia moved closer until she stood directly before me. I told them I'd fallen in love with my tree scientist for real, and that I'd been too frightened to admit it. My breath caught. Georgia! Let me finish. She reached for my soil-stained hand. I've spent my life preserving things minus the estate, family traditions, appearances, but I never learned how to nurture growth. Her fingers tightened around mine. Sin taught me to see the living networks beneath the surface, to recognize what's worth fighting for. And what is worth fighting for? I asked, hardly daring to hope what her answer might be. Instead of replying, Georgia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small brass key. What's this? And I'm converting part of the estate into a research center, she said. Sustainable forestry, historic preservation, botanical science. I've already spoken to your department chair, but I stared at the key. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. Her voice softened. In every sense of the word. If you want it. Time seemed to suspend in the warm greenhouse air. Outside, autumn was stripping trees bare, but in here, surrounded by growing things, possibility flourished. And I don't need the estate or the research center, I said, watching her face carefully. I just need to know this is real. Georgia stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Her hands framed my face, fingertips brushing my cheekbones with reverence. This is the most real thing I've ever felt, she whispered. This time when our lips met, there was no hesitation, no pulling away. The kiss deepened with all the certainty we'd been lacking before, minus tender yet urgent, a promise rather than a question. 2 weeks later, we stood together beneath the ancient oak. Its leaves had turned golden in the October light, some already drifting down around us. The fungal infection was receding, new growth already visible at the branch tips. And see, old girl's going to make it, I said, sliding my arm around Georgia's waist. And of course she is. Georgia leaned her head against my shoulder. She just needed someone who understood what was happening beneath the surface. As if in response, a breeze stirred the branches above us, sending a shower of golden leaves spiraling down around where we stood, roots intertwining beneath our feet.